Welcome back to the Investigator discussion series. I'm rather Incoherent, and this is Charlie Kane. Charlie Kane is a character that is enormously complex and has so many deck building options open to him that it's hard for me to say with any confidence I know what an optimal Charlie Kane is. I will be showing two versions of cluever Charlie today that I think are both fairly powerful, and explaining why I gravitate towards these sorts of Charlies, but I invite you, as always in the comments, to tell me what I'm missing, why other versions of Charlie are comparably, if not more strong, and just the sick things Charlie can do that I'm not paying enough attention to, even if they're not the best things he can do. But today, I'm here to explain what I think the best Charlie is, so let's start getting into it. Charlie is ones across the board, 6/6 soak. We are thoroughly in the territory of gimmick investigators, so what does he do that makes this okay? He has 3 additional ally slots. That's not going to fix the stat line, it definitely will fix the soak. The rest of his ability, though, will be fixing the stat line. Lightning Bolt, during a skill test you are performing, exhaust an ally asset you control. For this test, you get +1 skill value, plus an additional +1 for each matching skill icon on that asset. So as a basic example, if you are investigating and you have an ally with 1 book, you can use Charlie's ability during that test, exhaust the ally, and get +2 book, base +1 from his ability, and then +1 from the matching thing to go up to 3 book. That's not enough on its own. Ideally, for whatever you do proactively, you'll either have so many allies you can always tap 2 for a test, or you're gonna have some passive bumps so that tapping 1 ally is enough. There's a lot of ways to accomplish it, but the important thing here is that Charlie can do it. I will say though, this does make the Mythos phase a little bit scary. It's somewhat harder to deal with the Mythos phase in Charlie. However, Charlie can just soak any damage the Mythos phase incurs relatively easily. So on the one hand, he's not gonna be the best against the Mythos just because even when you can save yourself from the Mythos, tapping these allies is the same thing you do to be proactive. It's sort of the same resource. It's sort of like using counter espionage in a Preston Fairmont, I guess, where you're using Preston's extra money to pass the Mythos phase, but then you don't have it during your turn. So Charlie Kane can deal with the Mythos phase, he can deal with proactive stats, but he sort of has to meter out his resources and figure out the best way to handle any given situation. It's definitely not a bad gimmick though. This isn't like Calvin where you get to be a functional investigator because you get stats that do things once you set up. This is potentially going to open up some pretty unique things, especially with good deck building rules. He has deck size 30 and he picks 2 classes at character creation. His deck building options are literally every ally in the game, and then the cards from the classes you chose level 0 to 2, which is incredibly flexible. Lola wishes she got deck building rules like this. So when I was starting the video, I said that I can't confidently say what I think is an optimal Charlie Kane. That's just a factor of, there's a lot of different combinations here for Charlie Kane, right? Unless I'm losing my mind, there's 10 different Charlies that you can make. And that is a lot of different deck building options. And unlike Lola, who has a bunch of stipulations about how her cards are allowed to interact based on her ability, Charlie will just get whatever combos you can find as long as they're 2 experience and under. So just an enormous level of potential complexity that will only ever grow with the card pool. And there are a couple of things that Charlie has access to that I think are stupidly strong, and some things about Charlie that I think push him towards certain archetypes. Before I talk too much more about Charlie, let's briefly cover 2 things that are very important. His signatures are far from weak. They are both very impactful. Bonnie is absolutely insane. She is a 3-cost ally asset, 2/2 soak, commits for 2 question marks, so when you exhaust her with your ability, it gives you 3 to whatever test you're doing, and then reaction, after you exhaust Bonnie Walsh, ready a different ally asset you control, limit once per round. So this allows you to do some really gross things where, honestly, when you're playing Charlie, if Bonnie is in play, you feel like an incredible investigator. And if Bonnie's not in play, you kind of feel like the worst kind of gimmick investigator sometimes. Bonnie is so incredibly powerful. Charlie Kane is nothing without his assistant. It really does feel that way to play him. It's not that the deck doesn't work if Bonnie's not in play, it's just that it works so much better once you get Bonnie. Bonnie represents so many stat points over the course of a turn, it's absolutely wild. However, his weakness is also just as impactful. Burden of Leadership can be played around, but if you don't, it will just ruin your deck. Revelation, if you control no ally assets, shuffle it back into your deck. That's probably just not gonna happen. We're playing Charlie, right? That happens if you play Action 1 Deep Knowledge. Other than that, pretty much never happens. Otherwise, for each ally asset you control, either exhaust it or deal it 1 direct damage and 1 direct horror. So the exhaust part's not a big deal. If you draw this and it exhausts all your allies, cool, who even cares? However, if your allies are already exhausted, if you draw this at the end of your turn, deal 1 direct damage and 1 direct horror, kills most allies. Yes, there are plenty of allies with 2/2 soak or better, but there are a tremendous number of allies you would consider running in Charlie, where if you had exhausted them before drawing a Burden of Leadership, they'll just die. So Burden of Leadership sort of warps how you want to build your deck in a pretty meaningful way. So coming back over to Charlie, this ability tends to mean you really want to play high draw decks to find Bonnie Walsh because it's so strong in conjunction with this ability. You really want to have a lot of allies going into play pretty immediately, so you're going to be a little bit more setup heavy than other characters, and this to me tends to make me uncomfortable with Charlie Kane as a fighter. It's not that he can't do it, it's just that most people play a machete, and huzzah, they can kill the guy. But Charlie Kane plays a machete, and that's nowhere near enough. And having that sort of tremendous requirement of setup before you can start killing enemies makes me pretty uncomfortable with fighter Charlies. It's not that I think they don't work, it's just that I think the weakness of a fighter Charlie doesn't exist when you're playing a cluever. With cluevers, if you make up for low setup with good tempo later, that's fine, you can catch up for lost time. That's just fundamentally not how fighting works. So when I'm looking at Charlie, I always want to play him as a flex or a cluever to mitigate the additional setup of needing to fill all these ally slots. Because Bonnie's so damn strong, to me it's really hard to endorse versions of Charlie that are not very high draw decks, because you really want to find Bonnie. And calling in favors can help with that, but that's pretty much it for tutoring Bonnie. So you kind of want to pick either Seeker or Survivor pretty badly when looking at Charlie, just because those are the classes that have access to the best draw, and thus the most reliable ways to find Bonnie. I'm going to show off two versions of Charlie Kane today, both of them will be cluever Charlie Kanes. This one's pretty much pure cluever. The one I'm going to show after this is able to fight much more effectively than this one. It's not really built as a fight-leaned cluever at all, it's not built to contribute to enemies, it just sort of accidentally does, we'll cover that in a second. But this is very much a dedicated cluever Charlie Kane, built around Mariner's Compass as a card. Mariner's Compass is really, really good if you can pass the test, but you only get to use it once a turn. The way Charlie's gimmick works, you're only going to get to use his ability so often in a given turn anyway. It's really easy to reliably crush a Mariner's Compass test, or once you find both of them, to reliably crush two Mariner's Compass tests. So Charlie Kane is actually, despite his one in book, one of the best users of Mariner's Compass in the game. As I said, finding Bonnie Walsh is super important. If you go into red, it gets you out of Crossroads, it gets you Take Heart, and it gets you Unrelenting. In addition, while Rogue doesn't have great draw in general, Black Market's very good at finding specific cards, and this deck only has 4 skills in it, making it a pretty damn good Black Market. I'll also mention that it can be a little bit difficult dealing with the Mythos phase, unless you're in red using the new Sparrow Mask from Hemlock Vale, in which case the Mythos is pretty much not an issue, especially if you have found, say, Bonnie Walsh, or the Black Cat. I don't really ever find a way to run this. I always like the card, and then I look at putting it in a deck for 5 experience, and I just can't ever justify it. But in Charlie Kane, where it's tapping for 3 question marks, where its infinite soak is just making me not have to worry about killing the rest of my allies if I do need to eat a Mythos test, yeah, it's really good in Charlie. And this whole deck is only 24 experience. So there's a lot to like in a red-green Charlie. To quickly cover the allies, Art Student is going to pick up a clue when you drop it, and then it's going to tap for 2 books. Jeremiah Kirby is going to search your deck for a card, but he's going to give you 2 book when you tap him, and there's no exhaust perpetual thing on Jeremiah, right? With Milan, when you exhaust him, you're not getting the money out of him anymore, so Jeremiah is just transparently better in a Charlie. Lab Assistant, again, it comes down, it draws you 2 cards, then it taps for 2 books, just like Art Student. Leo DeLuca taps for 2 books as well, but he gives you an additional action, no need to exhaust, very helpful. And Miss Doyle gives you an ally that does not go in the ally slot when you get Augur, Zeal, or Hope, and they'll all tap for something relevant. Specifically, Hope and Zeal will both tap for 2 books, and Augur doesn't tap for book, but it gives you the ability to investigate at base 5 as an action, which is potentially more valuable. In this list of allies, Art Student, Kirby, and Lab Assistant all have pretty big effects when they hit the board, which makes calling in favors to help search for Bonnie Walsh much, much better. I've also got Hit and Run to replay them, essentially to play them the first time for 1 resource and then play them again down the line. I really like this deck, it's very cool. I especially like being able to get Black Cat early, but there are a couple of things in this deck that do spring out at me as notable absences. One of them is that, like, if your deck's this cheap in Charlie, after this point, I'm probably gonna be looking at trying to get a Red Gloved Man. Red Gloved Man just seems very good when you're playing Charlie Kane with its 24 experience deck core. The other thing is you can technically fit it in this deck, we're gonna talk about it more in a second, but Chance Encounter and Summoned Hound are a combo that the next deck is built around, so I won't cover it here, and technically you can fit it in this deck. My issue with that is that the deck, to me, doesn't feel like it has quite enough draw or quite enough card slots open to fit it. Because if I wanted to run Chance Encounter and Summoned Hound, I have to cut 4 cards out of this list. And 2 of them are probably going to be allies. Whichever allies they are, it hurts. Then the other 2 have to make room for Chance Encounter, and like, what am I even cutting? And the answer is probably I cut like Art Students and Hit and Run. And I run this combo instead if I want to do that. That way I maintain the same level of draw. But one of the things I like about this deck is because it doesn't run Chance Encounter Summoned Hound. It doesn't have the potentially super awkward scenario 1, scenario 2 you can get sometimes in the more combo heavy deck. And instead, it's just going to be going directly into power cards without any potentially awkward opening turns. I really like this deck. I don't know that I think it's better than Summoned Hound combo. And Summoned Hound combo is sick as hell, but it's also like something you never really need to play a second time. I will, however, also be showing the same sort of Charlie Kane deck I played through my blind run of Scarlet Keys on the channel, which is Seeker Survivor Summoned Hound combo. For this, we need to talk about Summoned Hound. This is a brilliant card that never sees any play because it has a crippling downside. Its icons actually don't matter even though it's going in a Charlie deck. It is a 3-cost, 1 experience ally arcane slot with 3 health and unlimited sanity, by which I mean no sanity. They're sort of the same thing. As an additional cost to play Summoned Hound, you must search your bounty cards for 1 copy of Unbound Beast and shuffle it into your deck. And that's very important, because no matter what Summoned Hound says, you just shuffle in a weakness that says, if there are no copies of Summoned Hound in play, set this aside out of play. There is one, we just put it into play. Otherwise, set an Investigator Summoned Hound aside out of play and spawn the Unbound Beast engaged with the same Investigator. So you put a weakness in your deck that sucks, and then later on, your ally that you paid experience for gets replaced by a 3/3/3 enemy that hits for 1/1, has Hunter and Retaliate. And also, the weakness isn't, like, the thing you originally played is gone, like it doesn't even stick around. This is the guy, he's pissed that you bound him, right? So Summoned Hound really doesn't get to see much play in normal decks. However, its effect is actually pretty sick. Lightning Bolt during your turn, except during an action, exhaust Summoned Hound, fight or investigate, either attack with base 5 or investigate with base 5. So yeah, those are really good effects. It allows you to deal 1 damage or find 1 clue as a Lightning Bolt at base 5. That's incredible. But you can't run the damn guy because the weakness he shuffles into your deck removes him from your board, and that just sort of makes him unplayable. Enter a Chance Encounter. There are other ways to perform this combo. This is the easiest by far. A Chance Encounter costs 2 experience, cost X. Choose an ally asset with printed resource cost X in any player's discard pile. Put that asset into play under your control. You can commit Summoned Hound to any investigate check to discard him and put him in your discard pile. As an additional cost to play Summoned Hound, that is the trigger for shuffling in the weakness. We don't play him. We just put him into play. Legally distinct terms, this does not shuffle in the weakness. And if the weakness isn't being shuffled in, Lightning Bolt Investigate at base 5 is kind of fucking crazy for an investigator that's normally finding clues at base 1. An additional reason that I don't really value putting Summoned Hound into this deck too much is because I'm already likely using most of my guys on the Mariner's Compass, so sure, Investigate at base 5 isn't terrible, but it's highly unlikely I'll actually be boosting that number too much because I'm already spending it on the Mariner's Compass. Coming over to this deck, having built it around Summoned Hound and Chance Encounter, I now need to cram my deck with draw. I need to find Bonnie Walsh, I need to find both Summoned Hounds, I need to discard them and find both Chance Encounters to replay them. There are a lot of things that need to happen before I get off the ground. To that end, at a crossroads, Deep Knowledge, upgraded Emergency Cache, Practice Makes Perfect, searching out upgraded Perception, and Unrelenting. Take Heart's just draw, does not come with Practice Makes Perfect. But that is a ton of draw. If you wanted more, I consider it overkill, you can replace the Art Students with Lab Assistants. The first Charlie I showed, Red Green, very much just starts playing allies and doing shit as quickly as it can. There's no like really important setup phase. You won't Bonnie, you'll play the stuff that draws towards her, but it's not the #1 thing you're doing. We have 2 Charismas, that gives you a total of 6 ally slots, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 allies in the deck, because we're perfectly happy to play and lose Art Students and Lab Assistants. They don't all need to interplay. This deck has the same 6 ally slots, and it has a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 allies. Just 1 Art Student over the minimum number of allies that we would want to have in the deck. And I just caught that apparently Milan had snuck his way into this instead of Jeremiah Kirby, so that's been swapped out. This is still using Sparrow Mask to help a lot in the Mythos phase, but our Mythos phase is notably worse, largely relying on Mist Oil and Sparrow Mask both being in play to get through a Mythos phase. Outside of that, we're also using magnifying glasses since our hand slots are going to be free, and that's going to let us much more reliably boost our summon Hound numbers, or even just basic investigate checks to much more reliable numbers than they otherwise might be. And this deck really is a deck built around just getting a shitload of extra action with summon Hound, and then putting enough points into your other tests to get by. And it might sound like the numbers are sketchy. I look at this and I think, does this have enough book? This can't have enough book. And I assure you it has enough book. Because if your plan is draw your whole deck, you can trust you're gonna have Jeremiah Kirby, 2 magnifying glasses, and get up to base 4 book. So it ends up being very easy to meter out your resources, whether it's on a base 4 action test or a base 8 lightning bolt that's not gonna need any resources. While editing, I realized I never covered something fairly important in this deck. You need to be wary of Burden of Leadership when playing this deck. That's definitely true. If you tap your guys before Burden of Leadership goes into play, it can just kill all of your guys. However, in this deck, when you tap Summoned Hound, it'll be base 5 to base 8 depending on what's in play. You don't need to use anything else. So you can easily use stuff like Unrelenting Perception and Practice Makes Perfect on a Summoned Hound test, and then if the Summoned Hound takes 1 damage, the dude has 3 meat soak, it doesn't even matter. You can find yourself in somewhat awkward spots right at the start of a game where Perception's in your hand and you don't have a way to test it with Summoned Hound yet, and that can be rough. It's not as good of a Perception or an Unrelenting as it would be in a normal deck, but there are pilot decisions that you can make that results in them being basically safe to use, and you can also always just roll the dice. I wouldn't recommend that. But I assure you that my experience playing this was that it just wasn't a huge problem to play around potentially drawing your weakness off of these Perceptions and Unrelentings, and it's predominantly because Summoned Hound is in the deck that it makes it manageable. And since this deck is so driven on assembling a combo and finding certain cards, there's not a lot more to talk about, so I will cover some notable absences from it. Leo DeLuca is an easy one. I'm a book-based cluever, this is an extra action, it commits for 2 book every turn, but also, he costs a shitload of money. Additionally, I'm already planning on taking 5 actions in a given turn. I do not have enough allies to reliably do anything with a 6th action, so Leo DeLuca's extra action's a lot less valuable than it otherwise might seem. He's not bad at all, I just personally don't think there's room for him in the deck, and he doesn't add a ton. This deck core is notably more expensive, it's 31 experience without the Black Cat, so yes, I would love to have the Black Cat in this deck, he'd obviously be very, very good. I just don't have room to put him into a deck core. And the last thing I'm going to cover is the Ravenquill, Abigail Foreman, and Encyclopedia. This is something I was using towards the end game of a Charlie Kane deck through Scarlet Keys. Essentially, if your base stats are 1, using Abigail Foreman Encyclopedia to boost them to 5 for 1 action is worth an incredible amount of value and reliability. Additionally, if someone else is fighting a boss, and you do this to them, they no longer miss the boss unless it autofills. So this is just a ton of team support and reliability, and I don't think it's bad. But if I'm going to build for this combo, I feel compelled to build directly into the combo and the draw. And we look at the things here that aren't that, it's deductions, right? There's 27 experience of combo support in this deck. So I do want to mention that there's absolutely room to play something similar to this in these colors, where instead of playing for Summoned Hound combos, you're playing for Encyclopedia. But you really have to pick one for the first half of a campaign. You can't really do both. However, it was definitely strong. It's not something I think is weak at all. And we're starting to get into the insane complexity that is Charlie Kane, because even if you feel incredibly certain that red-yellow is the best color combination in the game, which is an opinion that I have, I'm not sure if it's as true in Charlie because he has base 1s and so many options open to him that interact in new and unique ways because he's getting allies outside the colors. But even if you feel certain that Seeker Survivor just has to be the best Charlie, what Seeker Survivor Charlie are we talking about? Do you go for Summoned Hound combo? Are you doing Encyclopedia? There's definitely other stupid things you can do here. There's just too many options in the card pool for Charlie Kane to ever feel rock solid when you say this is the best Charlie Kane. I can say that I think this is the best Charlie Kane I've seen. I don't think Encyclopedia first is better. I don't think that the black market, more tempo-oriented red-green Charlie is better. But also, I don't necessarily think that any of these decks is that far above or below the other two. Coming down to a starter deck for the combo Charlie, because I think that's the one that's the hardest to build into. Like, if you're playing the red-green deck, I mean, the Black Cat comes last, Charismas come first, and aside from that, like, you probably take In the Thick of It for easy marking out of crosswords, right? Like, there's a bunch of cheap stuff in the deck that you fill with, and then you want Black Cat and Charismas as soon as you have enough experience to spend on them. The deck's just like literally 21 experience posts in the thick of it. It's nothing, not much of an upgrade path to discuss there. Over here, if you're going for like the Abigail Foreman Encyclopedia stuff, that's just gotta be your first buys. It's not really up for debate. You'll start with a Ravenquill because Ravenquill generates experience at the end of scenarios. So I'm gonna cover the dog upgrade path because it's far and away the one that's most complicated. In that case, I would start with, in the thick of it, for 1 Summoned Hound, 1 Chance Encounter. This is actually fairly awkward in scenario 1. If you were playing a campaign where you felt very confident you're getting 6 experience in scenario 1, I would not use it in the thick of it like this. I would use it to get 2 copies out of Crossroads and either Miss Doyle or an Unrelenting. However, in a lot of campaigns, you don't go in and knowing that you're gonna get 6 experience. Because of that, I really desperately need to have Chance Encounter and Summoned Hound, 2 of both of them, in my deck at scenario 2, so that's what I'm planning to use in the thick of it on. If it turns out I'm taking Charlie to Dream Eaters, these are out, we're getting Miss Doyle and 2 out of Crossroads. From there though, once you have your Summoned Hounds and Chance Encounters, it's kind of awkward to figure out what's next. You really want Unrelenting out of Crossroads, even the Perception upgrades are pretty big, same with eCash too, but you also desperately want Miss Doyle and 2 copy of Charisma. I would say that out of Crossroads and Unrelenting might take precedent even over Charisma, but once you have those 4 experience of draw cards, it's probably Charismas and Miss Doyles, and then from there you go back into upgrading for draw with the more expensive draw cards in Perception 2 and eCash 2. And Magnifying Glass 1 is honestly so minor that you might want to be like, no, we keep the level 0 Magnifying Glass, and I'm going for Black Cat or something faster. But it's definitely the least important part. Regardless of when you get Magnifying Glass 1, it's totally a bells and whistle card and not a priority at all. But that's the sort of upgrade path I would take for the combo Hound Charlie. Coming over to the tier list, I have Charlie Kane pretty much dead middle of my B tier, dead middle of the tier list overall. I have him above some incredibly reliable, talented characters with Kaimani and Mandy, where these characters just consistently crush their role. I think Charlie's playing a much more complicated game, but by no means a weaker game than other characters. The big thing preventing Charlie from being much higher on the tier list is that his scenario 1 is pretty damn awkward. The additional charismas are actually fairly important in a Charlie Kane. 4 allies is just not really enough to do everything you want to do. If you're not drawing a Mythos test, it usually is, but when you hit a Mythos test and you have to use your resources on it at only 4 ally slots, it tends to really mess up your turn. So because Charlie really wants those opening charismas, it can kind of slow him down in scenarios 1 and 2 where he's really not nearly as strong. Additionally, Bonnie Walsh is so important that there's a ton of variance from scenario to scenario, but especially in the early parts of a campaign before you can upgrade whatever sorts of draw you're running in your Charlie. If I were making a tier list just by scenario 8 power level, Charlie is one of the characters that would definitely be moving up the tier list quite substantially, because Charlie is just very, very good in a scenario 8 when he has all the things he wants to be playing with. But to get there requires a couple rocky scenarios right at the start. He's not weak. There are characters with weak openings like Stella that I think have much worse opening phases than Charlie. But on the other side of that, I think Stella's much stronger than Charlie. It's just that she has so much more experience she needs to use to get there. And I look at Charlie and I want to move him up and I'm like, Jesus Christ, he really is only 2 spots below Daniela though. This happens to me a lot when there's a character I like and I'm trying to justify why I can move them up. And I'll sit and I'll think and I'll come to the conclusion like, yeah, they're awesome. I can move them up. Who are they beneath? Oh, you're beneath Daniela? Well, maybe you're not gonna go up after all. Cause like, Charlie's good. He's very obviously good. His ceiling is incredibly high. His floor isn't even that terrible. It's just that it's a little bit rough in the first couple scenarios. And even when he's like fully online and doing the best he can, he's not breaking the game, right? He doesn't hold a candle to like a scenario 8 Winifred. He's just a lot better in scenario 8, somewhere near the top of A tier. He's good. I love him to bits. And I am, more than with any other character, certain that there are cool and powerful things about Charlie I don't know about. I'm not convinced they're going to really move the dial on how I rank Charlie, but I would love to hear about them. Like, there are so many different ways you can build this guy that there's no shot none of them are close to what I've been showing off. There's got to be some things that are comparably strong, and there have to be something out there that is going to get more mileage out of Charlie than what I've seen in the past. I just don't know what it is yet. And I'm gonna call it here. I want to talk more about Charlie. but I can ramble about the possibilities for Charlie Kane forever. I've already said what I think the best version of Charlie is based on my experiences in the decks that I've seen. I'm not going to go on any further about it. So let's wrap this up. I've been Rather Incoherent. Thank you for your time. Normally I just vaguely tell you to press the buttons to make the algorithm happy, but I will actually ask a specific question at the end of this video. Coming up in these last 10 reviews, I know who's left. It includes Leo, Patrice, and Silas. And I've sort of been looking at this block of characters, honorary Carolyn, although I'm much more confident in where she is. I've just been looking at this block of 3 people here. I'm like, man, are they supposed to be where they are? It feels like the floor for all 3 of them. If anyone has really strong opinions about Leo, Patrice, or Silas being under or over ranked, I would love to hear them. Regardless though, thank you for your time. Thank you to all the people who support this channel, the patrons over on Patreon and the channel members here on YouTube. And I'll see all of you in the next one.